everybody. Great to be learning with you on a Monday night, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Steven in New Hampshire, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in Missouri, Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Yosef in Englewood, New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandor in the Bronx, Bell in Florida, Gail in Kansas City, Lorraine in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Paula in the Great Northwest, and Frank in San Pedro, Ella in Southern California, Eve in Florida, Eli Neat in Silver Spring, Spencer in Connecticut, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Opening chapter 10 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Our daf tonight is page 160. Quite a short page, but we're not doubling because Nina and I have to get to a surprise birthday party. You can't be late for one of those. And this is the final chapter, so page 160, and I think we said is 175 pages in the tractate. So the siyum is not too far away. This chapter 10 is going to be about some of the particular technical legal requirements of contracts in Mishnaic and Talmudic times, even biblical times, Mishnaic times, Talmudic times. And it's actually quite interesting, sort of when we get into a little bit how they actually did things in these ancient times. It starts with a reference here in chapter 10 to a few verses from Jeremiah. And as we've seen a few times, they'll look outside the Torah, elsewhere in the Bible, right? Outside the Chumash, the first 5 books, the 5 books of Moses, known as the Torah or the Chumash, and into the rest of the Hebrew Bible, right? So Jeremiah, famous prophet. And there are some verses here which refer to a legal transaction. And the question that we'll get into a little bit tonight is, can we learn out halachas, actual laws, binding laws, from these references in the books of the prophets? Or do they sort of just end good advice and support for other existing laws? So listen to these verses from Jeremiah 32, verses 9 through 11. And I bought the field that was in Anathoth from Hanamel. I don't have the Hebrew here. Anathoth is probably Anasos. From Hanamel, my uncle's son, and weighed him the money, 7 shekels and 10 pieces of silver. And I subscribed the deed and sealed it and called witnesses, and weighed the money in the balances. And so I took the deed of the purchase, that which was sealed, the terms and the conditions, and that which was open. Right? So Jeremiah, we're talking about, approximately 500 years before the Common Era, 2,500 years ago. And already they were pretty sophisticated in how they were documenting the purchase and sale of land. Then later in Jeremiah 32:14, so said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, take these deeds, this deed of the purchase, that which is sealed, and this deed that is open, and put them in an earthen vessel that they may continue many days. Is this metaphoric? Are we to understand that this is the correct way to document a transfer of land? Let's get into it. Page 160a, right at the top, Mishna number 1 of chapter 10. In an ordinary document, its witnesses are to sign inside it, i.e., on the written side of the paper. But in a folded and tied document, its witnesses are to sign on the back of it. With regard to an ordinary document whose witnesses wrote their signatures on the back of it, we just said they're supposed to write it inside along with the writing in an ordinary document, and with regard to a tied document whose witnesses wrote their signatures inside of it, again, contravening what it said in the first paragraph of the Mishnah. So therefore, both of these kinds of documents are not valid because the witnesses signed in the wrong place. And Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel says a tied document whose witnesses wrote their signatures inside of it is valid because one can transform it into an ordinary document by untying it. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says everything is in accordance with the regional customs, something we've often seen. An ordinary document is rendered valid by having at least 2 witnesses, and a tied document is rendered valid by its having at least 3 witnesses. And with regard to an ordinary document in which a single witness wrote his signature, and a tied document in which only 2 witnesses wrote their signatures, they are both not valid. Now, what is this concept of a tied document? You can imagine taking a piece of paper and folding it a little bit like a fan, like an accordion, and then stitching the folds together. And I'll hold up this illustration from the Koran, and maybe you'll be able to see that. Right? So you fold it like a fan, and then you use some cord of some kind of stitching and to tie those folds together. And if you do that, so then you need more witnesses, and the witnesses sign in a different location in the contract than if it was a regular open document, as it were. Why did they make these tied documents that are folded and stitched together? We're going to get to that a little bit later. And that is quite interesting. Okay, that was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? About how many witnesses you need and where they sign. What biblical basis is there for the existence of these 2 types of documents? And Rabbi Hanina says, as the verse states, they shall buy fields for money and subscribe the deeds and seal them and call witnesses. Jeremiah 32:44. When the verse states they shall buy fields for money and subscribe the deeds, this is referring to an ordinary document. And when the verse states and seal them, this is referring to a tied document. Now we're on page 160b. And the next phrase, and call witnesses, v'ha'ed edim, call the witnesses, which more literally would be translated as, and have witnesses bear witness. This is interpreted as, and have bear witness, v'ha'ed, and this indicates the need for 2 witnesses, as the term witness, aid, in the Torah generally refers to 2 witnesses. We've already seen that a matter shall not be established by the testimony of a single witness. So if a witness already implies 2 witnesses and you need more than that, then we're going to 3. So the additional term indicates the need for 3 witnesses. How so? How can the verse call for both 2 witnesses and 3 witnesses? And Rabbi Hanina explains 2 witnesses are required for an ordinary document and 3 are required for a tied document. By the way, these tied documents, so they were just mentioned in the Mishnah. Now, the period of the Mishnah ended about the year 200 of the Common Era. And the period of the Gemara was the next 300 years, from about the year 200 to about the year 500. Already, by the Mishnaic period, by the end of the Mishnah, when it was being redacted, these kinds of documents were pretty much out of use. Already pretty much out of use by the time the Mishnah was closed. So this is much more a biblical era, or at least Second Temple era type of document that is being used. And then after the temple was no longer standing and priests had a different status in society, these kinds of documents were not being used very much, and we'll see why there's a connection to priests. Okay. Now, the Gemara questions this explanation: 2 witnesses for an open document, 3 for a tied, or an ordinary document, and 3 for a tied document. So the Gemara questions this, but I can just as well reverse it and say you need 2 witnesses for a tied document and 3 for an ordinary document. Why do you assume that the tied document takes 3 and the ordinary takes 2? And the Gemara answers, well, since the tied document requires more to be done with regard to its ties, it stands to reason that it requires more to be done with regard to its witnesses. It's a more elaborate document, and so it requires more witnesses. Rafram says that there is a different source for 2 kinds of documents. From here, Jeremiah 32:11, so I took the deed of the purchase, that which was sealed, the terms and conditions, and that which was open. And when the verse states, so I took the deed of purchase, this is referring to an ordinary document. And when it states that which was sealed, this is referring to a tied document. And when it states, and that which was open, this is referring to the ordinary unfolded part of the tied document, right? The tied document, it's not that all of it is folded with those like fan, accordion-like folding, and it's bound. It's only sort of like half the contract gets folded that way and bound, and the rest of it is more like an ordinary, unfolded piece of paper. So the Gemara questions this explanation. Well, but the tied document. Now, Rafram continues. So with regard to the phrase, the terms and conditions, these are the matters that distinguish an ordinary document from a tied one. How so? What are the details that differentiate the two types of documents? Well, this one, the ordinary document, has 2 witnesses. And that one, the tied document, has 3 witnesses. And in this one, the ordinary document, its witnesses are signed inside it, on the front side with the rest of the text. And on that one, the tied document, its witnesses are signed on the back of it, on the other side from the text. So the Gemara questions this explanation. But I could just as well reverse it, requiring 2 witnesses for a tied document and 3 for an ordinary one. How do you know that the 2 go for the ordinary and the 3 for the tied? And the Gemara gives the same answer. Since the tied document requires more to be done with regard to its ties, it stands to reason that it requires more to be done with regard to its witnesses. Rami Bar Yecheskel said that there is a different source for 2 sets of laws for 2 types of documents from here. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or at the mouth of 3 witnesses shall a matter be established. Deuteronomy 19:15. Now we've covered this before. Right, why does the Torah say this? If the Torah has already established that you need at least 2 witnesses in order to establish a matter, why does it say, or 3 witnesses, right? So if 2 will do, why does it mention 3? Or if you need 3, why is it mentioning 2? Now, we're not going to get into the nuances of that tonight. We learned that in another place in the Talmud. But it is the case that the Torah has specified that things will be established not by 1 witness, but either by 2 witnesses, the mouth of 2 witnesses, or the mouth of 3 witnesses. All right, what does that teach us here about these ordinary and these tied documents? So if witness testimony is established with 2 witnesses, why did the verse specify for you that it is also established with 3, which is self-evident? If 2 will do, then you have 3, then obviously you've established the matter. So what is the Torah teaching us? Rather, this verse serves to tell you that there is a requirement for 2 witnesses. When? For an ordinary document. And a requirement for 3 witnesses for a tied document. Now the Gemara questions this explanation, but I could just as well reverse it, requiring 2 witnesses for a tied document and 3 for an ordinary one. And the Gemara answers, since the tied document requires more to be done with its ties, it stands to reason that it requires more to be done with regard to its witnesses, requiring 3 rather than 2. And the Gemara asks, and is it so that these verses are coming for this purpose, to teach that there are 2 types of documents? But each and every one of them comes for its own purpose. They're not free to teach us this lesson. The first verse comes for that which is taught in a Baraisa. When the verse states, they shall buy fields for money and subscribe the deeds and seal them and call witnesses in Jeremiah 32:44, this verse comes to teach us good advice, that people should carefully document their purchases in order to provide permanent proof of purchase. Good advice. If it comes to teach us that advice, it doesn't also come to teach us the requirements of particular kinds of documents and how many witnesses there are. And when the verse states, so I took the deed of the purchase in Jeremiah 32:11, this was merely how that incident occurred. And the phrase is not intended to teach any halachas, any Torah laws. And when the verse states, at the mouth of 2 witnesses or at the mouth of 3 witnesses shall a matter be established, this is stated in order to juxtapose, that's Deuteronomy 19:15, and it is stated in order to juxtapose 3 witnesses with 2 witnesses for several reasons, as delineated in the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis in Tractate Makos, page 5b, which we're not going to get into tonight. Now, the Gemara explains. So rather, the entire institution of the tied document is not biblical in origin, and that's why there's no reference to it in the Bible. Rather, it is of rabbinic origin. And all these verses that were cited above by the various Amoraim, the sages of the period of the Gemara, were intended as mere support for the concept of a tied document as opposed to actual sources. And the Gemara asks, and what is the reason that the sages instituted the tied document? And the Gemara explains, there was a place where there were many priests, and they were very quick-tempered, and they would seek to divorce their wives impetuously. Now, we're not in such a hurry that we can't pause for a second and quiz the class. Why are we concerned that priests are quick-tempered and will divorce their wives at the drop of a hat? And why aren't we concerned with other kinds of Jews that they might act the same way and divorce their wives quickly like that just because they got angry and said, you know what, I don't want to be married to you anymore, and write up a quick bill of divorce and hand it to the wife, and then they're divorced? Why are we concerned in the case of priests rather than for all Jews? I'm feeling that a bunch of people already got the answer. And so I'm sure you recall that the difference between a priest and an ordinary Jew is that an ordinary Jew can marry a divorced woman, and a priest cannot. A priest cannot marry a divorced woman, even his own ex-wife, right? Now, a regular Jew cannot marry his own ex-wife if after they divorced, she went and married someone else. But if she didn't do that, if they just got divorced and said, why are we getting divorced? We love each other. Let's get back together. Then they can get back together, no problem. But a priest can't do that because a priest can't marry a divorced woman even if he himself is the one who divorced her. So these quick-tempered priests who were divorcing their wives, just because they got angry about something, then found out that there's no way out. You just lost your wife, and you're going to have to go on through life without her, and they regretted that. And so to stop these impulsive, impetuous? There's a word I'm not quite getting, but yeah, these priests were just too quick-tempered. To stop that, they slowed down the divorce process. Enter the folded and tied document for a bill of divorce. Right. Impetuously, that's the word. Okay. And they were quick-tempered, and they would seek to divorce their wives impetuously. So the halacha is that a priest may not marry a divorcee, even his own wife, even his own ex-wife. And these priests who acted impetuously often regretted having divorced their wives. And therefore the sages instituted an ordinance that the bill of divorce for these people should be of the tied format, which is a long, drawn-out process, hoping that, meanwhile, their composure would be regained and they would reconsider their decision to divorce. So the Gemara asks, okay, this works out well for bills of divorce, forget. But what can be said with regard to other documents? Why is this procedure used for other documents as well? And the Gemara answers, this was instituted so that you should not differentiate between bills of divorce and other documents. So they happened because of bills of divorce. And then once they were doing it for bills of divorce, they started doing it for other documents that require, care and thought. And pretty soon, all the documents were being done that way, even though there was no real reason to do that for other kinds of documents. But eventually, once the temple was destroyed, these documents went out of favor. Now, interestingly, there was a note here that in the 1960s, they found such a document from the period of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So that's about the year 135 of the Common Era. And so, that was after the destruction of the temple. but still about 65 years before the end of the Mishnaic period. And so while they had fallen out of favor, they still were being used at that time. New subject. Where do the witnesses sign? On a tied document. And Rav Huna says they sign between each tied fold. And Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says they sign on the back of the written side, taking care that the signatures are exactly opposite the writing on the outside. Rami bar Chama said to Rav Chisda, according to Rav Huna, who says that the witnesses sign between each tied fold, it enters our mind that he meant between each tied fold on the inside of the document. But this is difficult, as there was a certain tied document that came before Rebbe, and Rebbe, not realizing that it was tied, said there is no date on this document, therefore it is not valid. And then Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe, said to Rebbe, perhaps the date is hidden between the tied folds. So Rebbe opened it, and he saw that the date was in fact between the tied folds. So what do we learn from this story? And if it is so that the witnesses sign between each tied fold on the inside of the document, Rebbe should have had two objections and said there is no date on this document, and there are also no witnesses signed on this document. Since he didn't complain that there was a problem with the witnesses, it must be that they signed on the other side, and he already saw it. Rav Chisda said to him, do you maintain that Rav Huna meant that the witnesses sign between the tied folds on the inside? No, he meant the tied folds on the outside of the document. The Gemara questions Rav Huna's opinion, but let us be concerned that perhaps the party holding the document falsified some information and wrote whatever he wanted. And this is a concern, as there are already witnesses signed on the document. In an ordinary document, the witnesses sign immediately following the text, so there is no possibility of adding to the text. But a tied document has part of its text written in the folds, but also has a part of the text written on the face of the document on the unfolded paper, before or after the text in the folded part. So if the witnesses sign between the folds, there is the possibility of writing additional text in the unfolded section, right? So early security measures to make sure that a document wasn't altered after it was signed. And the Gemara explains the case is one where it is written in the document, quote, everything is confirmed and established. This is the formula that you use to show that this section of text is finished. You can't add to it, because at the end it says everything is confirmed and established. And every folded document must contain this formula at the end of the text to prevent forgery, as any writing after this formula would be disregarded. Now the Gemara, and that was obviously, that formula has to be there when the witnesses sign it, or the witnesses won't sign it. Now the Gemara questions this explanation, but let us be concerned that perhaps the holder of the document wrote whatever he wanted, and afterward he wrote another time, everything is confirmed and established, right? It was a chunk of text, and it said everything is confirmed and established, and then he added a bunch of more terms to this contract after, the parties had signed it, the witnesses had signed it, and this guy's a fraudster, and he's adding more material into this contract that wasn't witnessed and signed. And he can do that because, all right, there's a chunk of text, and then it says everything is confirmed and established, and then he writes another paragraph, and he writes everything is confirmed and established at the end of that. Is that a possibility? Therefore, anything written after the first declaration would be rejected, even if followed by, and the Gemara explains the reason we're not worried about that is because we write only one declaration of everything is confirmed and established. And we do not write two declarations of everything is confirmed and established. So if you find that formula written twice on a document, something's fishy. At the very least, you disregard all the text after the first formula, or perhaps you disregard the whole contract. Now the Gemara questions further, but let there be a concern that perhaps the holder of the document erased the declaration, everything is confirmed and established, and then he wrote whatever he wanted over the erasure. And afterward, he wrote the declaration, now for the first time, everything is confirmed and established. He erased it, added more text, and then he added that formula at the end. And the Gemara responds, how could this happen? Doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say a document that includes a suspended correction of text inserted between the lines of the document which is verified at the end of the document is valid, but, and now we're at the top of page 161A, a document with a reference to words written over an erasure is not valid, even if it is verified at the end of the document, right? So this erasure is going to ruin the document. It won't be valid. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Everything is confirmed. So at the end of a document, before the formula, everything is confirmed and established is written. Any corrections made in the document are verified by adding to the text on line number so-and-so, such and such a word has been added, or some similar formulation. So if there was, sometimes the scribe makes a mistake, but then he writes before the final formula that I made a mistake on such and such a line, and then I corrected it, so that we can see exactly what was done. And anything which is not verified like that renders the contract invalid, or at least that material. And the Gemara clarifies this statement, and they said that an erasure on a document renders a document not valid only if it is in a place in the document where the declaration, everything is confirmed and established, should have been written, and only if the erasure is the measure of space in which the declaration, everything is confirmed and established, can be written. The only concern with erasures is that the crucial formula, everything is confirmed and established, might have been erased, and this would allow for unlimited forgery. If the erasure is such that this formula could not possibly have been erased, the document is valid. In other words, they're going to apply analytical reasoning to the document, and was it some kind of innocent mistake, or do we have reason to suspect that something more fraudulent is afoot? Okay. I'm going to take one question from Sharon. I'm going to remind everybody that tonight is already, right? It's Erev Giving Tuesday. Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. We are in the midst of our annual campaign, and we really need your help to keep the lights on and the Torah flowing out, lighting up the world. Just all our expenses went up this year, and we appreciate so much everyone who is donating and supporting our nonprofit via donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Okay, one question from Sharon. We have to keep in mind when and why Jeremiah purchased this land. It was a show of faith for the people as they were very beaten down and damaged by the destruction of Jerusalem and their lives. He wanted to demonstrate the eventual return and reestablishment of the state of Judea/Israel. Interesting that the rabbis selected this chapter, this parak, as an exemplar for legalistic consideration. What a privilege having you in the class, Sharon. Excellent point. Thank you for giving us some context on those verses and see how important they are. And think what a dream it was. Maybe not during the 70 years between the first and second temple, when Jeremiah saw the fall of the first temple, and he prophesied that they would come back. And it happened within 70 years. And then the second temple was reestablished. But eventually the second temple fell. And for 2,000 years, we were dreaming that we would come back and have a Jewish state in the Holy Land, and that Jerusalem would be the eternal capital of the Jewish people, would be a Jewish city. And we have the tremendous privilege of living in such an era. We should be so grateful and never stop being grateful for that. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, tomorrow, Tuesday, Giving Tuesday, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org at 6 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. All the best. Have a great night.